everybody that's been a fan of the channel for a while probably has a pretty good idea of what the level of bouncy happiness means. But for those of you that are just, new tuning in and have no idea what this is, let me give you a couple more seconds of awkward just bouncing while I stare into your soul for a second here. Okay, that's good. And now let me reveal that, yes, today we're going to be talking about real, actual history. Stuff that happened in our world that Oda will probably likely incorporate into One Piece because he's Oda and he does that type of stuff, and I love him for it. Okay, so today I was out for a walk. It was actually a really nice day out today. Blue skies, it was really warm. I was walking outside, and I thought about a video that I've been thinking about for a while now, or not rather a video, but it was like something that I wanted to address at some point. I didn't really necessarily plan on making a whole video about it, but screw it, we're here, we're doing it now. But the idea is, Wano. What's the whole kind of, not like the main goal of this arc, but like one of the main goals? The main goal right now is to like get rid of Kaido and Orochi and Big Mom. That's the main thing we're dealing with right now with the rebellion. But overall, after all that's taken care of, what is the goal of the Scabbards? What is the goal of Momonosuke? Okay, of course it is to resurrect Odin as a zombie lord. No, of course not. Well, Moria's a thing. Maybe you could resurrect Odin as a zombie lord. But no, the main thing that they want to do is carry on the wish of their master. Odin wanted Wano to be open up to the world because the Kozuki clan, a very long time ago, isolated the nation. We can assume it's because of the world government's, oppressive power. The world government started to take over, and Wano was like, we don't want anything to deal with that. We're just going to shut our borders. It's illegal for anybody to come into the country that's a foreigner, and it's illegal for anybody to leave the country. Odin felt very stifled by this, and he felt like, it's time to open up the country's borders. Even more so after he went out and escaped the country and traveled with Whitebeard and Roger, he wanted that even more so because of Joy Boy. He learned about the adventures of Joy Boy through the Void Century and the Poneglyphs, and he's like, we need to open up Wano because in 20 years, Joy Boy will be returning, and we have to make sure the country of Wano is there to help him. So that's the basic idea that Odin had. He looked at Wano as just this really closed off, really stifling place, and he wanted to open that up to the world, very positive outlook. He even said that best when he was out traveling with Whitebeard. He's like, when he was out traveling, he was like, I saw so many different people and different perspectives and so many different places, and that's just the thoughts and the beliefs of the world. It was all so different, it was all so new, but it still wasn't enough. And even when they were descending from the Sky Island, Odin was holding up Momo, and he was like, kind of like Simba from The Lion King a little bit, just like, I want you to look out there in the world, Momo, and I want you to see the way that the world is, and how Wano needs to change for the better, okay? So it's a very positive outlook, but it could also be twisted in a way where even if it is opened up, it could be a negative thing as well. In the matter of fact, it could actually be a thing where Wano might be, at the end of this war, it might be opened by an external force. The best possible scenario here, that things like the way you think it's going to happen, is, Kaido and Orochi are defeated, Momo becomes the new shogun, probably have like Kinemon or some other figures there to guide him and advise him, considering Momo is, like 8 years old. But, Momo takes over the country, the Scabbards are his like new daimyos or whatever, and Momo decrees, I will follow in my father's wish and I will open up the land of Wano to the entire world. That's what you think is going to happen, but let's throw this out there. Let's say, for example, the Marines get involved and the world government gets involved with this war. The CP9, CPI just 0 now. They're already kind of involved in Wano. But let's say they get involved during this battle, and I made a whole video about that. And let's say they do get rid of Kaido and Orochi, but then the Marines and the CP, they open up the country by force. So it did fulfill Odin's wish. The country was open, and you did get rid of Kaido and Orochi, but it's sort of like a bittersweet victory there. Or it's like, oh no, you don't understand. You want to open the country because of your lord. Oh, that's great. Yeah, we're doing it by force now because Orochi didn't want to play ball with us. So great, Momo, you're the new shogun. That's awesome. We're taking over. And so the reason why I would think this might happen the way that it is, and Oda might go this route with it, is because that actually happened. It's time for history lessons, ladies and gentlemen. All right, we got a lot to cover today, so I hope you take notes, okay? So, It's actually a lot to cover. I don't even know where to begin this. Okay, I think most of you would probably understand, just because of the fact that even if you don't know anything about Japanese history, just the fact that Wano is an isolated nation and Oda takes a lot of references from real life, you could probably figure that at some point Japan was an isolated nation. But once again, I think most people understand this. Okay, yes. However, it was not always an isolated nation. Japan's been around for a very long time. Before the Edo period, during the Warring States period of Japan, it was actually open to trade. And that's actually, it ties back into our favorite member of the Rocks crew. That's, of course, no, I'm not talking about Rocks. I'm not talking about Shiki. I'm, of course, talking about, you gotta say it with me, ladies and gentlemen, Wang Zhi! That's right, Wang Zhi. So Wang Zhi was a Chinese pirate, but he also helped the Portuguese to have trade with Japan. In fact, the whole reason that the Japanese ended up getting matchlock rifles to be used during the Warring States period was because of the Portuguese trade that was kind of translated and sort of like ambassador, not really ambassador, he wasn't really an ambassador, he was a pirate, but he helped people, you know, into Japan, the Portuguese, and he kind of translated back and forth, and that was like, he was like their liaison, sort of. So, yeah, they did have trade with certain countries before the Edo period. Okay, then the Edo period happened. Alright, this is the Oda Nobunaga, and then Hideyoshi happened for a little bit, and then eventually the Tokugawa took over. I could go into so much detail with this, but let's just, alright, they were not isolated, then the Tokugawa took over, and the Tokugawa decided that outside influence was maybe a detriment to the country. There's a bunch of different, like articles for the exact reason why they wanted the country to be isolated. A lot of sources seem to cite this simple idea that, okay, the Portuguese and a lot of Europeans were bringing ideas of Christianity into Japan, and the shogunate viewed that as a threat, you know, for, you know, Christianity to, like, get people together under that particular banner. They saw it as a threat of religion, all right? Now, there were other reasons to do it as well, but they basically decided, he's like, okay, we're gonna isolate the nation. Nobody born in Japan that's a Japanese citizen is allowed to leave. And they didn't completely shut off trade entirely, because if you had like a true isolated nation, that's kind of actually hard to do. So they did have trade with certain companies. The East Dutch India Trading Company was probably the most common one there. I'm going to make some references to Samurai Champloo here. Samurai Champloo actually takes place in the Edo period, and there was an episode of Samurai Champloo where they actually encounter a Dutch trader that's in the area. Yeah, that's the reason why, because the Dutch were one of the very few people that were actually allowed to trade, or actually very few Europeans, the only European force, basically, that was allowed into Japan to trade during this particular period. They also traded with China, and also the Ryukyu Kingdom, which is just south of Korea, which, by the way, had the most badass flag ever. Like, look at the Ryukyu Kingdom flag. It's magnificent. It's like it's a moon, but it looks like a shuriken, right? It looks awesome, right? I want that on a shirt. Okay, but anyway, so they let the Dutch in. They traded with the Chinese, but even with the Dutch, they were very particular with how this isolationist thing worked. There was actually an edict, like all the things that you weren't allowed to do during isolationism, and you actually look into the edict, and it gets pretty, like, explicit. It's just like, you're not allowed to have anybody into the country, or you'll be sentenced to death. If you bring someone into the country, sentenced to death. If you bring a letter from a foreign body into the country, you will be sentenced with death. They were very overt with, like, isolated, okay? Even with the Dutch, the people that they did let into the country, they were only allowed to come in through Nagasaki port, and in fact, they even built an island called Dejima, and that was the place where they were allowed to live, and just, like, that was, like, the trading post that they were allowed to dock their ships and hang out in, like, the port of Nagasaki, but they were not allowed to just to roam around the country whenever they pleased, okay? So even with those particular situations with trade, they still were limited to that. But it still brought certain things into the country, like sports. Like, here's an image of the Dutch bringing billiards into Japan. So they had stuff like that. So they were still learning stuff from the Dutch, from, like, the West and European culture from the Dutch. So that was something that was allowed in, sure. So yeah, that's basically the way it stayed for around 220 years, which is a pretty long time to maintain that edict. Like I said, it wasn't perfect. Every now and then you would get a special exception. You get, like, a foreign diplomat or something coming to the country. But for the most part, they really did enforce that, where the citizens were not allowed to leave, and, you know, you weren't allowed any foreign powers in outside the very rare exceptions. And then the 1850s happened, and What foreign power do you think was responsible for ending that 220 years of isolation? What foreign body arrived in Japan with that giant pry bar and just placed it in the damn gate and just ripped the damn chain off? Well... Yeah, it was only 1853, so we didn't get quite up to 50 states yet, but we were working on it. Yeah, the United States was kind of on a roll at this point, and they were kind of like, we're gonna open up Japan! Why? Because we're gonna open up Japan! And, well, they opened up Japan, and they certainly did that. Okay, so... this fellow here is Millard Fillmore. He was the 13th president of the United States of America. Those that remember him, which are not very many, because he was a rather bland fellow, to be honest with you, got the position completely by accident, too. His predecessor, Zachary Taylor, he was a major general in the U.S. Army. He actually ended up dying during his presidency because he ate some cherries and some iced milk at a 4th of July celebration, and he ended up dying of a digestive ailment like 5 days later. So, I mean... this guy becomes president, no, not you, Piers. This guy becomes president because maybe of some spoiled milk, so whatever. If you want to read more about Millard Fillmore's presidency, go and do it. Fugitive Slave Act, that's all I'm saying, alright? But look, okay, the basic deal is we're talking about the Perry expedition, okay? Then it was just Millard Fillmore was the one that was the president during this time period, okay? So, if you're gonna remember one thing about Millard Fillmore... remember the Fugitive Slave Act, and what he did about it. But, you know, beyond that, if you care to, maybe the opening up of Japan. Okay, so you got Commodore Matthew Perry. No, he's not a Commodore. There you go. Commodore Matthew Perry. And, yeah, he was sent to go and open up trade with Japan. He didn't necessarily have to use force, but he used basically, what was the term for this? Oh, yeah. We have giant battleships parked at the port of your country with a bunch of cannons aimed directly at the mainland, so open up or stuff might happen. Diplomacy. That's what he used, and it worked. I mean... given the situation of Japan and being isolated for 220 years, they really weren't up on the times with military tech. So, yeah, I mean, it's called the Black Ships. The arrival of the Black Ships is what the locals of Japan would call it. These giant ships, you know, billowing smoke into the air, arriving at your port. I'm just realizing now there's also similarities between this and the Fire Nation from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Isn't a history interesting? It just gets sprinkled all throughout our fiction. I love it. Okay, so Perry shows up the first time to Japan, parks his ship outside the bay. The people there are, you know, like, hey, you can't come in here, you're a foreign body, we can't allow you in here, you're not a member of the Dutch Trading Company, you're not allowed to come in here. And Perry was just like, screw you, I'm gonna do it anyway, we have the giant battleships, you really can't stop us. So he did that. And even, honestly, to even be more of kind of a dick, he took all the cannons on his ship, because he arrived in Japan, I think it was like a little bit after Independence Day, it was like in, just like July 8th, July 9th of 1853, and so in order to celebrate America Independence Day, he blasted a bunch of cannons into the air, and just under the auspice of like, oh, we're just celebrating American Independence Day. Boom, 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 boom. Like, yeah, this is just what we do. Boom, boom. There were like 70 cannons on this damn ship. Boom. Well, yeah, that wasn't at all attempting to intimidate the hell out of Japan, right? So he's there, and he has a letter from President Fillmore, and he needs to deliver it to somebody, like, in a position of power. I think even a member of the samurai class, like, arrived on the ship or asked for, like, you know, okay, you can give it to me. It's like an assistant to the daimyo, like a member of the samurai class. And Perry was just like, no, it has to be someone even higher up than you. I'm not talking about, like, local governments. We're talking about the head honcho here, okay? So eventually, you know, someone of power eventually did, you know, meet with Perry and stuff, and he basically presented their demands. The demands were essentially, you know, let American ships dock here whenever, allow an American consul to be built on the country, open up trade with the United States. Yeah, that's pretty much the terms. Yeah, it was really, it was gunboat diplomacy. That's what it was. That was like, give us this stuff, or boom, boom, boom. It didn't directly, like, attack the citizens right then and there, but it was made pretty abundantly clear. Actually, no, he did actually. I think there was a stipulation in the thing that basically did spell out, like, unless you do this, unless you agree to all of our demands, we will go to war at you. And I think he even did state, like, you will be decimated. The United States will go to war with you, and you will be crushed, and that's just how it goes. So I would suggest you do that. So Perry left, that there, left the options on the table, and he's like, I will be back in 1 year. However, there was also some other interested parties at the time, because when other countries figured out that the United States were doing this, they were like, hey, we better also go to Japan and try to feel like Russia. I think France was also involved there, because they basically didn't want the United States to get like a special deal here. They were like, hey, this isn't just between Japan and the United States, we want to make sure they don't just get a special deal. So essentially, Perry went back on his word after realizing these countries were interested, and also just to put more pressure on Japan, because I guess the idea was like, okay, we said we'll be back in a year, so they're going to be trying to figure out what to do and everything, but if we show up early, kind of puts even the pressure on them more. It's like, yeah, I know, we said a year, but then we remembered, wait a second, we have all the cannons, so we showed up in February. So they show back up, and the Convention of Kanagawa was held, and it was an extraordinarily unfair treaty, and the United States got everything they wanted, out of threat of, like, the country being wiped out. I mean, what other options did the Japanese really have at this particular point? They didn't really have a lot of time to work with. So this entered the Bakumatsu period from 1853, I think, to 1867, which was the final years of the Edo period of Japan, and the final years of isolation, where everything was set up, American trade began, an American consul was set up, and diplomats arrived on the island and everything like that. And that brings us into the Meiji period afterwards, after the Edo period ended. So that's the situation, how that went down. So now there's a lot more to unpack in that. I was just basically giving you a very brief Cliff Notes version. You can go read about that at your local library. But yeah, it's an interesting period of history, because I like learning about Japanese history and stuff, and this was the moment where the Japanese history really, that intersected with American history, which I'm also very familiar with, and then it continues on from there. There is a lot of other interesting stories I would like to tell about, like, Japanese history involving, like, people arriving from that, because that country is, tucked away in the corner of the world, and so you have stories of people, like, arriving there from the West, bringing new ideas and stuff. Like, for example, read up on William Adams. William Adams, this was before even the Edo period. This was in the 1500s. But William Adams was the first European, the first Englishman anyway. It was the first European to become a samurai. Like, how does that happen? Like, well, read up about him. It's a very interesting fellow. There was a few foreigners that arrived in the country before Edo that became the status of samurai and the noble class, and it was interesting. So I would suggest looking those guys up. But that's how that went, and you can definitely see the comparisons here between Wano. You could definitely see the world government, the Tenryubito, sending their ships, sending the marine warships to surround Wano and under threat of Buster Call, which is kind of what Admiral Perry... Oh, and by the way, in case you were curious of what happened with Admiral Perry, in case you were thinking, man, that Admiral Perry guy was kind of a dick. He also, by the way, appears in an episode of Samurai Champloo, Baseball Blues. He shows up, although he was called Alexander Cartwright in that episode, because Alex Cartwright was the person that invented baseball, and baseball was the center of that episode, but he looks, and just his attitude is very similar to Admiral Perry. But in case you're curious, in case you think Admiral Perry was kind of a dick, he went back to the States, and he was a major alcoholic, ended up getting severe arthritis and gout, and he died. And this is one of the last pictures taken of him, and you could just tell by looking at this dude's face that he was just done with existence. I mean, look at that guy. He's just like, all right, I'm done. I've done the life thing. I'm just gonna check out now. And yeah, so didn't really have a super happy ending for him. Okay, but anyway, you could see that with Wano. You could see, like, oh yeah, yay, Kaido's defeated, Orochi is dethroned, the Kozuki clan becomes the next shogun of Wano, peace and prosperity in the country for years to come. Boom, boom, boom! Like, oh, yeah, hi, we're the world government, and we learned that you recently had a change of management. Well, we decided to take advantage of that. And especially since they now have the SSG. They have the special science group that was developed by Vegapunk that replaced the Warlords. And hey, the whole reason why the Warlord system was truly abolished, I mean, yeah, Cobra and Riku Dole the Third, they got up there and they said their piece at Reverie. But I think at the end of the day, the world government decided to go ahead with the abolishment of the Warlord system because of the promise that the SSG showed. They were very confident that Vegapunk's new organization would be capable of being able to exhibit just as much power, if not more, than the Warlords. So they send out these decked out, like, they might have, like they honestly, like, might have warships that are to, like, our level, like what we have right now, or even beyond that. I mean, Vegapunk has cyborgs that could shoot lasers. You know, he's invented Terminators, essentially, so he might send these giant SSG ships to surround Wano with, like, laser cannons attached to them. Yeah, we upgraded the Buster Call a bit, and, unless you want that to happen to your country, you're going to listen to what we say now. You know, because Orochi really, you know, got that, you know, that string about to break with all his crazy demands, right? So like, oh, you want Vegapunk? We'll give you Vegapunk. It's possible that the world government might still let Wano operate, like, with its own government. They might say something like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you could still have your shogun, you could still have your daimyos, you could still have whatever government you want. Basically, what the world government would be doing is forcing them to join. Normally how that works is that the island that wants to join the world government has to present the heavenly tribute, you know, maybe money or whatever resources they have, and it seems like it is a willing thing. Like, you can either pay the heavenly tribute and be accepted into the WG, or you cannot pay the heavenly tribute and you will just not be protected by the government. And there's plenty of lawless, not lawless, but there's plenty of islands in the world that are not part of the WG that end up being attacked by other, you know, pirates and stuff, and the Marines don't help them, right? So the situation with Wano and the world government might be more of like, we're going to force you to pay the heavenly tribute. You don't have a choice. Because we really want Wano, because of all the different, like, strong warriors, sure, but also the Sea Prism Stone that's literally, like the country is built on. They're gonna want that shit. So they're gonna be like, okay, we're taking over the country, you can keep your government or whatever, but you will pay us heavenly tribute. You will pay us, and it will be in gold, and because the Wano used to be the country of gold, so there's probably a lot of gold deposits on the island too. You will pay us in gold, and you will pay us in regular shipments of Sea Prism Stone. This is not, you know, an option. This is not a choice. This is just what's going to happen if you don't want the SSG laser cannons to obliterate your island. So, and this might, by the way, you might think, well, what's the deal with, like, maybe Luffy and everybody involved here? This might happen after, like, because eventually the Straw Hats have to leave. Eventually the Straw Hats and the Heart Pirates and the Kid Crew, they're all gonna leave Wano. After Kaido and Orochi are taken care of, you know, they're gonna leave thinking everything's good. Like, bye, Momo, bye, Kinemon, I hope everything works out for you. And then, like, a week later, the world government shows up and, like, you know, here's our official decree of demands. And so, considering the history of Japan and the United States in that regard, and considering that Oda has sprinkled history throughout his story, I could totally see that happening. So I just wanted to address it here. I wanted to make a video about it. Read more about this history if you're interested, you know, and more about the history of Japan. You know, it's an interesting thing, especially during the Tokugawa, the Edo period. A lot of interesting stuff happened there. That's basically what all of Wano is based on there, of course. But, yeah, hope you learned something, I guess, today. You have anything to add, Barry? We are not even touching upon that dude yet. Okay, that's a video for another day. All right, signing out, everybody. Later.